All right, so today I wanted to talk a little bit about this tweet thread that Zuby Music put out. Put it out on July 5th, so it is a little bit old, but it went very viral, and I think he brings up a lot of really good points here that I think people really should understand, and it should be talked about a lot more. So, anyway, I mean, it got again 59,000 likes on the main one here, so definitely pretty viral. Um, First one, 20 things I've learned from human, or sorry, 20 things I've learned or have confirmed about humanity during the quote unquote pandemic. Number one, most people would rather be in the majority than be right. I think that that's very, very important. And this is why atrocities have happened in the past. I think it's the main reason why atrocities have happened in the past, in that um, people, typically, a lot of the times it's subconsciously too. People aren't twirling their mustaches, plotting terrible things, right? I think it's just typically just basic human survival, and that if you are ostracized from society, that means that from a biological perspective, that means that your genes are going to end, right? You've had tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, and now it's just stops in an instant, right? So humans naturally want to fit in for those reasons. There's other reasons, but I think that that's the main one. So yeah, people would absolutely rather be in the majority than be right. Um, this is another way you know this too. This is another way that the way that marketers do things is that a way of the one of the main ways of marketing these days. It's not necessarily to you know I guess a better way of putting it is that the way marketers, one of the most clever ways of doing it is that they paint whatever their product is. Their whole way of going about things is to make people think that other people, specifically the majority of other people, like their product, and would not only that, would think more of you as an individual if you had their product, right? That is the way, one of the main ways marketing is done these days, right? And for this simple reason, just this basic psychology, right? At least 20% of the population has strong authoritarian tendencies which will emerge under the right conditions. I don't know if that's probably a decent number, to be quite honest. I think that it's probably more a 80-10-10, maybe you could say 60-20-20, but in that there's a big group of people in the middle that will basically go along to get along, and that it all comes back to the number one point, in that if that big group of people in the middle, probably in that 60 to 80% point range, if they think that the majority of people want freedom, they'll be big. Oh yeah, rah rah, I love freedom. Yeah, screw the government. But if they think that the majority of people want never-ending lockdowns, want people to be thrown in jail for dissenting, then it's going to be rah rah, throw them in jail, right? So I think that that's a very good point. Fear of death is only rivaled by fear of social disapproval. The latter could be stronger. And again, this is exactly what I brought up in the first point, right? In that the reason why people fall for the reason why people would rather be in the majority than be right is entirely based upon the whole thing of social disapproval, right? The one, like, it's a better way of putting it is that the thing people fear the most, well, not everybody, because there's a lot of exceptions to the rule, but probably 80-90% of the population, something people are deathly afraid of is ostracism, right? People can, and this is the reason why high school and junior high and stuff is so you know promotes so much anxiety amongst people, and that kids are just so desperate to fit in, and a lot of people, just personality wise, they're not wired to fit in, so that's what provokes anxiety, right? And I mean, there's a lot of people that maybe they're just a little bit off, but they have to kind of act differently to fit in, right? And I think that that's what does it, and it's the same thing with this stuff too, right? um, Majority of people, I don't think, want lockdowns off the start, probably, but I think that things definitely changed around the second lockdown. The problem is that a lot of people were afraid to speak up, especially, like, people will kind of question it to some degree, but then you get people one on one, and they're like, yeah, this is the stupidest thing ever, like, why are we doing this? But if they're in a big group of people, even if it's with, like, friends, right, even if it's with friends or family or people that probably already agree with them, they're still afraid to do it. So imagine how afraid people are to do it with people that are strangers, right? So propaganda is just as effective in the modern day as it was 100 years ago. Across access to limitless information information has not made the average person any wiser. And I think he's 100% right about that. This is something that a lot of people would question. Oh no, there's so many different sources. Like no, like the average person lives in. I would argue the average person lives in as much or more of an echo chamber than they did 50 years ago or 100 years ago. And people say, oh, how's that possible? Well, it's very simple. If you look at the numbers here, I've made videos on this. 50, no, not 50%, sorry, 40% of Democrats, and I think it was a quarter of Republicans, think that people are 10 times, at least 10 times more likely to end up in the hospital if they get COVID than they actually are. 10, at least 10 times. Not 10% or 50% more. No, 10 times. That is 1,000% more. So does that sound to you like people who don't know where to get their information, or they're not sure who's telling them the truth and who isn't? Or does that sound like people who live in echo chambers? Okay, that's obviously people who live in echo chambers. Again, take another example. Black Lives Matter. You know, I've talked before about this video of a guy. He went to a Black Lives Matter rally. I think he's done it even more than once. And he asked people, "Oh, how many people do you think are killed by, unarmed black men are killed by police every year?" And the average person's guess was well into the hundreds. Some people even into the thousands. The actual number is about 10, roughly 10. So again, the average person's guess was well over 10 times more than the actual number, right? So again, does that sound to you like people who don't know where to get their information? They're not quite sure who's lying and who isn't? Or does that sound like people who live in echo chambers? Obviously, it's people who live in echo chambers, right? So yeah, he's 100% right on that point. Anything and everything can be politicized by the media, government, and those who trust them. Again, that's another point that I think the average person just doesn't understand, is that they don't realize just the extent people are willing to go to politicize things. People will politicize literally every single issue that exists. Doesn't matter how relevant it is, they will politicize it. Many politicians and large corporations will gladly sacrifice human lives if it's conducive to their political and financial aspirations. This is another very important point that it just boggles my mind why people can't figure this one out, in that people will accept that if they're distinctly on one side or the other, every one of those people, 99% of them, they will say, oh, if you're on the right, oh, the liberals, they don't care about human life, and if you're on the left, it's, oh, the right wingers, they don't care about human life. So everybody accepts that the other side will do it, or at least most people accept it. Why is it so hard to accept, based off those facts, that everybody's willing to do it? And if this situation didn't prove it, nothing will. Absolutely nothing will. And again, a lot of people say, "Oh, why would they want people to die?" Well, that's an irrelevant point. For this, I mean, take a prime example. The Iraq War killed what, 1 million people, tens of thousands of Americans. Can you think of one American politician that supported the Iraq War that has came out publicly and said, "I was wrong on that"? There isn't one that I'm aware of, right? The ones that were against it were always against it, and the ones who supported it were always supporting it. I mean, there's people like Obama that when he was elected talked about how bad it was, but he just kept it going. So there's nobody that had stringently supported it, that has vehemently came out against it, and always vehemently been against it since then, at least that I'm aware of. And even if there is a handful of people, it's still 99% of people that haven't done it, right? So it's still a moot point. So this idea that, oh, why would the government want people to die? Like, again, like you're ignoring history too. Like, just so naive, it's not even funny. Most people believe the government acts in the best interest of the people, even many who are vocal critics of the government. And again, this is the other thing too, that the people who bring up residential schools, like, this stuff happened like a generation ago. and yet you think that the same government that supported the residential schools is going to fix the problem? Like, how stupid can you possibly be? Governments killed hundreds of millions of people over the last 100 years. Oh, yeah, these are the same people that are going to say, like, how naive can you possibly be, people? It's just astounding, right? It's just completely astounding. Um, Once they made up their mind, most people would rather commit to being wrong than admit they were wrong. Again, like, yeah, absolutely. And this comes back to the whole ostracism and social disapproval point. And I think it's also, I think people nowadays have just gotten so used to living in echo chambers that they can get away with this stuff as well. So I think there's a combination of things that cause that, but those are the main ones, I think. Humans can be trained and conditioned quickly and relatively easily to significantly alter their behaviors for better or worse. Um, that's a tough one. I think that people, I don't think that it can be done very, very quickly. I do think that it can be done relatively quickly, but I don't think it can be done like basically overnight, right? I mean, if you look at the fear mongering from the whole virus situation, I mean, that went on for what, 2, 3 months before we actually had lockdowns. So it wasn't an overnight situation. And not to mention, too, they didn't push mask mandates on us for another, what, 2 or 3 months after the lockdowns were initially implemented. They didn't push stay-at-home orders and a lot of that stuff until a ways after. So it wasn't done overly quickly. When sufficiently frightened, most people will not only accept authoritarianism but demand it. That's a very good point, too, and it comes back to a lot of the other points. People who are dismissed as conspiracy theorists are often well researched and simply ahead of the mainstream narrative. Again, that's something that's been definitively proven over the last year, that so many quote unquote conspiracy theories have been turned out to be true. The lab leak quote unquote theory, death rate comparable to the flu, just go down the list, right? There, Fauci was lying the entire time, about things like masks, like, social distancing is pseudoscience. Like I say, you go down the list, right? Most people value safety and security more than freedom and liberty, even if said safety is merely an illusion. Again, that's the perfect point too. In that, the point I always bring up with this is social distancing and the whole surface thing, right? In that, social distancing was definitively proven to be junk science. It's complete bunk, and that, I think it was an MIT study, found that whether you're 6 feet away or 60 feet away, the chances of being infected is literally the exact same. So, social distancing, complete pseudoscience. There's absolutely no data that backs it up. It was literally completely made up. Same thing goes for the whole surface spread idea, that you go to grocery stores and places, and they have to wipe things down after you touch it every single time. You go to the gym, though, you got to wipe everything down after you touch. Like, there's no data that show that surface spread is significant. And not only that, the data shows that even on infected surfaces, your chances of catching it are 1 in 10,000, right? So if you're looking at random surfaces, the chances of catching it are literally 1 in the millions, maybe even hundreds of millions. So the chances of catching things on surfaces it's literally a non-existent phenomenon. But yet, how many places still do the whole wipe down thing? How many places still have the plexiglass, right? How many places still got a social distance? Like, it's literally an illusion, right? Hedonic adaptation occurs in both directions, and once inertia sets in, it's difficult to get people back to normal. That's another good point, too, in that society is back to normal, but you still see a ton of people wearing masks and social distancing and all this stupid crap, right? A significant percentage of people are thoroughly enjoy being subjugated. That's another thing too that I think it's hard for people to understand, but I don't think you can argue against it in that there is a large percentage of people that want to be subjugated. They want to be treated like peasants, right? And people wonder, oh, why was all this terrible stuff done in history? Well, I think that this is one of the significant causes of it. This point right here, number 14, is that a lot of people, probably not the majority, but a good percentage of people want to be subjugated. These are the people that want government to control healthcare and the government to control every aspect of your life. They don't care that government healthcare is absolute shit. It's nowhere near as good as basically any other system. The same thing goes for public schools, right? Public schools are way worse than charter schools or private schools. Charter schools are even cheaper too. So anyone who brings that up is an idiot. But yeah, they still want it. Why? And because I think that at the end of the day, most people project their own worldview onto other people. So if they believe something, they assume other people believe it the same or even more. So when it comes to this situation, like, people want free healthcare not because they think it's better. People want public schools to do everything, not because they think it's better, but because they think that they are too incompetent to look after their own healthcare. And because of that, they project that onto everyone else. So, I'm too incompetent to look after my own healthcare. Therefore, everybody else must be as incompetent or even more incompetent, right? So I think that that's what that stuff comes back to. The science has evolved into a secular pseudo-religion for millions of people in the West. This religion has little to do with science itself. I think a better way of doing it, calling it a religion, a better way of saying it, I think, is a cult, right? In that it is a cult, right? It is a cult because you can't question it, right? Because if it was actually science, people wouldn't get so pissed off when you questioned it. If it was actually definitively proven to be true, they wouldn't get so pissed off when you question it. The fact that they do just goes to show that it is a cult. Most people care more about looking like they are doing right rather than actually doing the right thing. Again, that is entirely true. Again, that all comes back to the whole social ostracism point. I've already went into that. Politics, the media, science, and healthcare industries are all corrupt to varying degrees. Scientists and doctors can be bought as easily as politicians. Again, that's another point too, that 97% of scientists agree climate change. Like, no, the scientists are every bit as corruptible, if not more corruptible, because people still have this illusion that they're not corruptible. Um, they can easily be bought off. All right, and I mean, if you look at the climate science example, those people's job, those guys' jobs depend upon climate change being this big massive issue. So if their job depends upon climate change being this big massive issue, of course they're not going to question it. And if you understand how the industry works, anyone who understands how these industries work, you would know that half the job of being a climate scientist, for example, is convincing people to give you money for studies so you can get paid. Now, here's the thing. If you put out studies showing, questioning the validity of climate scientists, are you going to be more or less likely to get funding in the future? Obviously, you're going to be less likely. If you put out, quote unquote, studies showing that climate change is this big, massive issue, are you going to be more or less likely to get funding in the future? Well, obviously, you're going to be more likely. So this doesn't necessarily prove anything, but what it does prove is that there's a very clear conflict of interest and a very clear incentive for them to, at the very least, overstate the severity of climate change. And the same goes for this stuff too. It's all the same in the end. Um, if people make if you make people comfortable enough, they will not revolt. You can keep millions docile and strip their rights by giving them money, food, and entertainment. And again, this is where the whole UBI $2,000 a month comes from. This is why they allowed sporting events to continue to go on, and that I've become convinced over the last more and more convinced. I always kind of thought, but I've become more and more convinced that sports are just a way to distract people from what's really going on. It's a way to give people a sense of accomplishment without actually accomplishing anything. You know the usual points that people would bring up for that. Now again, I still do like sports, right? I still do watch now and then, but nowhere near as much as I used to, and it's mainly due to that fact, and also due to the fact that all the woke stuff that's being pushed. So again, at the end of the day, I just don't really care all that much anymore. Um, so yeah, modern people are overly complacent and lack vigilance when it comes to defending their own freedoms from government overreach. I think that's one of the most obvious statements ever. It's easier to fool a person than convince them they've been fooled. Yeah, I mean, of course. And 21, I guess he puts out a bonus one. Um, Most people are fairly compassionate and have good intentions. As a result, most people deeply struggle to understand that some people, including their quote unquote leaders, can have malicious or perverse intentions. This is bad. And this all comes back to most people just projecting their worldview onto society as a whole, right? And people think, oh, I have good intentions, therefore other people must have good intentions, right? At least when it comes to the politicians, right? So anyway, that's what he had to bring up. Again, if you don't follow Zuby, again, he's a very good follow on Twitter. Um, don't agree with everything he says, but I think he's 95% of what he says is I think it's right on the money. So anyway, like I say, go check him out if you don't follow him already. But anyway, I'm going to leave the video there. If you liked it, make sure you hit that like and subscribe. Make sure you check out those links below. Give me a follow. If you want to donate, you can do that as well. Again, all that good stuff. So like I say, check out those links and stay tuned for more.